This week, our focus is definitely on the latest developments over Gaza conflicts. So, three things to mention. First, this Monday, the Security Council finally adopted the U.S. draft resolution, endorsing and calling Hamas to accept a ceasefire deal that President Biden announced on 31st of May. The resolution, Resolution 2735, particularly said Israel accepted the new ceasefire proposal. But this is not what the Israeli representative said during that adoption meeting.
Israel will not let Hamas rearm or regroup so that Gaza can pose a threat to Israel. This is the unwavering goal that we are determined to achieve. This also means that Israel will not engage in meaningless and endless negotiations which can be exploited by Hamas as a means to stall for time.
Answering our confusion, here is what Mr. Robert Wood, Deputy Permanent Representative of the United States, said.
Israel has accepted this agreement. That has been clear. So it's Hamas's turn. Hamas needs to accept this deal.
That's not what the Israeli representative said in the council just now.
As I said earlier today, Israel has accepted this agreement. Hamas, up until now, has not. We want to see Hamas accept this agreement because it is a great opportunity to bring peace to the region.
When you say they accepted it, did they accept it in writing to the White House or something? Because publicly, we're not hearing those statements aligned.
As I said earlier, this agreement was something that Israel had put forward. So Israel supports this agreement. Let's be very clear about it.
As the story developed, we learned that Hamas has welcomed the resolution, and then later, U.S. Secretary of State Mr. Blinken said Hamas asked for numerous changes of the deal, and then Hamas denied what Mr. Blinken said. So I would say this is a really, really confusing situation for reporters here in the UN, and sorry for us to make you confused. Second thing, UN's Commission of Inquiry released two parallel reports on October 7th attack and occupied Palestinian territory, accusing both Hamas and Israel of war crimes for mounting attacks against civilian populations and murder or willful killings. The reports, which covered the period up to the end of 2023, specifically accused Israel of crimes against humanity for torture, extermination, and gender persecution targeting Palestinian men and boys. What is the Secretary General's position?
Well, this is a report by the Commission of Inquiry. They spent a lot of work on it, and it's a very serious document. It will be now reviewed by the Human Rights Council, so we, for now, are leaving the matter in their hands. But obviously, there are many different reports involving human rights and the rights of different groups that have been focusing on the conflict in Gaza and the situation on October 7th, and all of those reports need to be looked at seriously.
Can it be an evidence for both Hamas and Israel that committed war crime?
Ultimately, it's up to the judicial bodies looking into questions about what sort of evidence they will use. We don't know what follow-up bodies there will be on the ground, but as you know, both the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice have been looking at the various situations, and it's up to them to determine what kind of information they will use as evidence.
And we all know that IDF executed an operation that freed 4 hostages in central Gaza. In the same operation, which reportedly covered up as a humanitarian convoy, also killed what Gaza Health Ministry claimed almost 300 Palestinians. What is the UN's reaction?
Israeli army freed 4 hostages while more than 200 Palestinians were killed. From the Secretary General, does he think this operation is righteous or not?
We, of course, welcome the news that the 4 hostages are free and reunited with their loved ones. The Secretary General, I think, expresses his extreme sorrow and his condemnation of the deaths of hundreds of Palestinian civilians and injuries to hundreds more that happened in the context of the operation.
Is it acceptable to use humanitarian convoy as disguise to conduct military operations?
Humanitarian aid must not be used and must not be perceived as taking any side in a conflict. The safety of our humanitarian workers depends on all sides and the communities on the ground trusting their impartiality. And that is something we will always try to reinforce.
Oh, one last thing. The release of annual report on children in armed conflict. This report meant to be released later this week, but the former Israeli ambassador Gilad Erdan leaked the news online that might accelerate the process.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas.
Now, this is the first time that Israel was added to the UN list for violating children's rights. But let's be fair, not only Israel, both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad's armed wing were also added to that list. The report said the conflict in Gaza has led to a 155% increase of what it called grave violations against children. The report shows that UN verified more than 8,000 grave violations against over 4,200 Palestinian children and 113 Israeli children in 2023. What does this list mean for Israel and Hamas?
You said it's not a legal finding, but don't you worry that if it's not legal finding, it's not legal binding, nobody would care about this report?
It is an action-oriented report that leads to my immediate engagement with listed parties to convince them to sign action plans to end and prevent those violations. If they so decide, they're all sovereign states or armed groups with their own ideas, they can decide to engage. If they decide to engage, we are under an obligation to provide technical assistance to that listed party in order for them to speedily stop the violation, release children if they are in their possession, and engage in prevention measures for the future.
It's worth noting that Sudan also recorded high numbers of violations against children. The UN said it has seen a staggering 480% increase in grave violations against children in Sudan. Another horrible effect by the waging war in these places. From what I learned in Syria, a long-lasting war could destroy a whole generation of children, even without these violations, but with illiteracy or psychological impact. These are very heavy topics, but sadly, that's what happened. And that's all from me.